All right, we're live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 9th, 2021 Litchfield Budget Committee meeting. The time is now 7 o'clock. I will call the meeting to order, and we'll kick it off with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, before we get into public input this evening, as with past meetings, we do have a remote participant this evening. Mr. Hayes is dialed in through the WebEx. We will need to have a motion and approved if we will allow remote participation. So we have a motion by Ms. Douglas, second by Mr. Leary. Any discussion? All right, we'll kick it off with Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Mr. Leary.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Douglas.
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Stevens. Mr. Barca.
Yes.
All right, that passes 6-0-0. I counted right. 1, 2, 3. Yep, perfect. We do have an absence this evening. Mr. Taylor will not be joining us as he announced last week, and I am aware that Mr. Sun has a small conflict for 15 or so minutes. He's wrapping up a chorus concert at GMS this evening, and then we'll be attending shortly. Okay, great. Next up on the agenda is public input. Hearing and seeing nobody for public input, we will now close public input. There is a second opportunity at the end of the meeting. Any changes, additions, modifications to tonight's agenda by the committee members? Hearing and seeing none. In terms of correspondence, I did circulate a list to Mr. Sullivan, who's with us this evening, and I'll just read it into the minutes. We have our town budget report sent last Friday, the 3rd. Also on the 3rd, I circulated the meeting agenda to the committee for this evening. On the 4th, we did receive, the budget committee as a whole received an email from Mr. Jim Norton requesting all budget committee member names in terms of expiration, which were sent across. On December 5th, we do have the minutes from December 2nd received, as well as amended minutes that were circulated to committee on December 7th. Actually, excuse me, we received them on December 7th and circulated on December 8th. On December 7th, we have an email from Business Administrator Izabicki on CHS budget updates, which will be presented this evening, and that was forwarded to the Budget Committee. On December 8th, we have the confirmation of budget hearing date, time, location, which will be Thursday, January 13th, 7 p.m., CHS Auditorium, which has been reserved. Thank you to the SAU for the support with that. And December 8th, Superintendent Jetty sent very draft warrant articles for the budget committee to begin looking at. And also December 8th, Mr. Hayes notified me of remote participation this evening. All right, any other correspondence from any other committee members? Hearing none. We have our minutes from December 2nd as amended. Has everyone had a chance to review? Any other motions or amendments to the minutes? I'll entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Leary,
Second.
second by Ms. Douglas. Discussion. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Sun.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison.
Yes.
Mr. Leary.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Stevens.
Yes.
Mr. Barca.
Yes.
And Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
That passes 8-0-0. And I paused there for a moment because I just recalled I did not ask Mr. Hayes to inform us if anybody is with him this evening and the reason for being remote.
Oh, yes.
There's nobody with me, and still concerns over COVID-19 and its variants.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that update. All right. So 2 minutes passed. All right. Next up is we're going to wrap up school business this evening, which is the majority and the primary objective of tonight. We left last week with a handful or so questions that were entered into the Google Doc. I do see updates have been made, but I'll turn it over to Superintendent Jenny for an update.
Great, thanks. Good evening. So the questions that we were asked last time are numbers 16 through 21 on here. So I'll walk through those with the committee. So the AP Sciences, basically we are in an alternating year pattern with a couple of the AP Science courses. So next year we intend to run AP Physics and AP Biology. And then the year after that, it will go back to AP Chemistry and AP Environmental Science. That will allow students to access all 4 AP courses potentially over a 2-year window of time. So we've fallen into a pattern of how we're going to schedule that. And if you look in the budget, so this was really referencing the budget line under the high school science, you'll notice that they've already linked AP Bio and AP Environmental Science, I think, are in one line. So the supply line is sort of like, well, whichever course is running, these are the supplies to support that course. And what I had a conversation with the chair of the science department today, who's new. She inherited budgeting for the first time. And I suggested that she do the same thing with the AP Chemistry and Physics. If those are going to alternate, then just establish that as a supply line. And whichever course is running, that's what you're going to have available. So she's going to work on streamlining that process for next year.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. For the vocational note, there was a calculation or an error in the note that we have corrected. So that now reads correctly. It was relative to the Pinkerton Academy amount.
Yeah.
4 students times 990 is not 9,000. So we fixed
Well,
that.
it's three students.
And we also fixed
Yep.
that there will be 3 students next year. And so, or 3 students this year,
Yep.
of which 2 are juniors, because the question was, I know there was an interest in doing a cut in that line. And I said, well, wait a second. We want to make sure that the 2 juniors, there's a number of juniors are able to finish up. So it's 2 juniors that are earmarked in there that would need to go back for their senior year to get the second credit of their program at Pinkerton. So that has now been noted correctly. So it is 3 students, and we've made the right dollar amount. Those are actually questions 17 and 18, so it addresses both of them.
Okay, just any questions back to the school on 16 or 17?
So moving on to 19. 19 was the GMS math question. And I checked with Principal Mitchell, and he said that he would not need the math books if the new math curriculum is selected and purchased. So he said at the time the budget was developed, it wasn't definite that that was going to be included. So that was just sort of a mismatch. But he said the problem is if you take it out and we don't do this, then I'm left without that ability to replace. So then he would need the replacement text. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's not a massive amount of money, but there are, I understand the concern that it looks like a double ask, but his point is then I better get the new ones, because otherwise if I have to replace, I won't have it. So, but whatever the committee wants to do with reconciling that, that's the reason why it's written the way that it is.
Okay, thank you.
On question 20, how many spare Chromebooks are on hand? So I checked with our IT director, and Jason said that there are 12 brand new Chromebooks in boxes ready to deploy for a couple of purposes. A student who comes in, moves in, they would then have their new Chromebook. It's on hand. If there were to be a complete destruction of a Chromebook, it gets run over by a bus kind of thing, that would be ready to deploy. There are also some, he didn't give me a number, but there are some Frankenstein Chromebooks. So broken, repaired. I walked into the IT department yesterday, and there were 2 clamps on a screen drying over in the corner. So they do Frankenstein them back together when they can. But the reality is there are 12 new ones ready for a new student coming in. I would just point out that we're 1-to-1 Chromebooks across 12 grades. So that's really 1 extra per grade when you look at that number.
Okay, great.
And then question number 21 was on CHS custodial. And so basically the notes make it look as if there's a position that's missing. It's because the dollar amount is correct by the number of positions. So the overall budget number is right. The note will not replicate if it's 2 vacant positions, which it is. So the note just shows it as 1, and it says, here's the cost of that one. What it's not telling you is, but there's another one, and that's why it totals up to a higher dollar amount. So it's just a feature of the way that line operate, or the lines operate. So we verified that we're not missing a position, that the dollar amount in there is correct, and there is an additional vacancy.
So it was just a description error. It was just a description
it's-
error.
The descriptions that are in the salaries and benefits budget dump in from the personnel budgeting system. So it's just kind of, if we can add, we can add that to the note, but that's just how the software works.
And then one more question came in today, which is dated here, number 22, actually. What was the underspend in the special ed department in the following years? And so we created a spreadsheet and have linked that for you to see the actual amounts.
Yep.
And so those are provided to you. I will point out that I was in a conversation today with the special ed director. She's very concerned about that this year there will be an overspend in the tuition line. So again, we created this budget a year ago, projecting what we thought we were going to need. And then between actual tuition amounts and actual student needs, she's anticipating that there will be an overspend in that particular line this year. So I just want to pass that along. I know it's easy to reflect back, but special ed is one of those roller coaster budgets that you're never quite sure who's going to be here and what the needs are going to be. And right now it looks like a potential overspend.
A couple things that I also noted on it was the fund balance that was used to offset tax rate in each year that's listed from 2014 through 2021. In each case, the amount that we returned is in excess of what the special services underspend was. There was 1 year out of the 7 where we returned less than what was in that underspend, but that's a function of a bottom line budget. There's a deficit in the general fund. You know, the other side of the house has to cover that, subsidize it to a degree. So we returned 150 in that year, and that was a function of, we received an invoice from First Student on June 30th, and it was $55,000 for services they hadn't billed us for 6 months prior. We had to pay it. So we returned less that year than we tend to budget in terms of what we do on the revenue side when we're doing the budgeting. I also noted the drivers, the accounts that were underspent, and it was consistently out of district tuition and transportation.
Yep.
If you don't have as many kids go, you save that tuition, but you also save that transportation side of the house. And there's also savings in some professional service lines. So I noted what those total amounts were out of the total underspend.
Do we still budget the special ed transportation, assuming we're sending the one student where they're going, but we sometimes save money if we double up with like Hudson or someone going to the same place?
You can always try to do ride share,
You just never know what's going to happen.
but there's so many variables that are involved in that. One of the major ones being the personalities of students, their needs. You could put yourself in a volatile situation on one of those buses. trying to
Yeah,
find
I remember we
ride
used to
share.
always budget assuming
Yeah.
it's a 1-to-1, but sometimes they'd save some money.
You always
Right,
try
yeah.
to make an effort, and there's always an ability to save in that way, but
It's
I
not
don't
guaranteed,
know
obviously.
how much we're able to utilize that.
The special ed directors all communicate because that's a two-way street. If another district can benefit by helping us with the transportation, so they keep pretty open communication amongst each other, and Devin always makes that reach out. But to Corey's point, sometimes it just doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't.
The school schedules differ, personalities differ, et cetera.
I was the one who asked the question and posted it on the question form today.
Oh, thank you. I was going to ask.
It was me. Because I was curious about it because it was discussed at the last meeting. And I was surprised, and I admit I was wrong about having a greater amount of underspend than I thought we had in the past. But I was, I think having the fund balance that was returned, to kind of compare those numbers, I was, I think we're still on the right track. And because it's such a variable budget, I wouldn't feel comfortable voting in favor of any reductions there. The other piece of it too is when we have a list of underspent projects at the end of the year, traditionally, and the biggest proportion of them are facilities projects that we haven't been able to get after, that we've taken care of. And so those items haven't been in the following year's budget in order to kind of keep that level. So I think that's something to consider too. we're not spending the money on frivolous things. It's things that we need to get after, and that's a way to do it. One way to fund it.
I'll note one last piece. When it comes to fund balance that's returned to the town, that's not solely underspend on the expenditure side. That's, a function of, you have underspend in your general fund, but you also have potentially over collection of revenue. Your revenue projections were lower than what you actually received. So that's not just straight underspend in the general fund. That's a function of those two items that has to be calculated together.
So in preparation, I know last week there was certainly a lot of emotion and passion behind special services. And so I took that as well and said, all right, similar to your question, and I thank you for asking that because I did the same analysis. I have all the details from original budget that was approved by the voters and all the expenses from 2011 and forward. So, and I have that in one file. So I've consolidated all files. I have this massive Excel file with 2011 original and actual for every budget line that the school has. With that, I did an analysis also on special services. And I'll share with you, it's very, very closely aligned to what you just presented. Some of the numbers are slightly off, but in the spirit, in the direction of this conversation, it's about right. So I looked at it from 2015 forward. You went back to 2014. And it does support factually an underspend significantly on several of these lines. And I think we've seen this as a committee. We knew this was here. But the challenge for me this year is that, if there's no return to the taxpayer, I need to challenge this specific line, this specific budget, like I do other budget sections. And with the underspend and with knowing that there is a reserve account out there to cover the overages, which is the intention of that account, right? I have to make a motion on this budget tonight. And just so we're all aligned here, what I have up here, oh, it's not sharing it. I'm sorry. I'm talking like it's shared. It shared let me do this again. Shared screen. So here's the historical data, and I'm glad to circulate this to the committee so everyone has it as a factual. And I understand this is an eye chart, but this is 2011 all the way through 2021 with actuals, and then 2022, which you're currently in, as well as what's proposed for 2023 are in here. The PowerPoint is just a summary of the special education from 2015 forward. And what this supports, and just looking at averages again, understanding that it's very, student driven. A 3-year average underspend from 2019 to 21 is 278. A 5-year average underspend is 218, and a 7-year underspend is 217. So, black and white, I have to treat this account like the other section of the budget. And so with that, I'm going to make a motion to reduce this account by $200,000.
I will second it.
I would agree that it is. Data shows it. I think, and to your point, we've always known it's been underspent. I guess I'd point out that, looking at the numbers that the SAU provided, it is always returned except for 1 year.
But it won't be this
Or
year.
will it be continued?
That's
We've
what's,
already
that's
heard.
what's
Yeah.
changed, right? If that was the process still, then I'd feel more comfortable with that. But that's not going to be the process as presented to us last week going forward.
Well, can I just say, it's not necessarily, I'm not saying that amount won't be returned. I'm saying that sometimes like that one year that was off, I generally, as a rule, do not transfer, except for the one circumstance last year, I do not transfer out of special services.
Yep.
So keeping that in mind, that balance does get returned. I don't transfer out of those accounts.
I guess my other concern too is that the rest of the budget is a lot tighter than it usually is. Like they came in pretty tight, it seems like.
It did.
So to come in tight everywhere else and then trim this down, again, it's probably gonna be underspent. Don't get me wrong, but I think for both of them to come in tight is, to me, is a little worrisome.
But again, if he's not
Yeah.
transferring it from this account to cover other areas of
Yeah.
the budget.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So, and again, I'm just looking at the best interest of the taxpayer and treating this section of the budget like we do the other sections at this point. I see it clearly. It was presented clearly as an underspend. And again, knowing that we have a reserve account, and just, I don't know if you have this, Mr. Zwicky, what the amount is in that reserve account, just for our
We can
understanding?
pull that.
I can pull that right now.
I want us to think about the mechanics of the reserve account. So the reserve account has money in it now. The warrant article that you have in front of you is not contributing more into it. If we rely on it on June 30th, our ability to add to it has gone. And the budget that you're then adopting here would not, I mean, let's just say that something horrific happens and we deplete that account. Our next ability to add to that is March of 22, right?
Right,
No,
No.
there's an ability to call a special meeting of the town.
that's true.
That is true. But
That is true.
when
And
we call
reality-
special meetings, there's a lot of criticism that we're up to something and that we're pulling something, right? So we try not to do special meetings. We try to be thoughtful and measured in the way we approach things. So I just, again, just think through the mechanics of accessing those funds and then trying to replenish those in a budget that we've cut 200,000 out of for special ed when you're talking, there's potential for haywire in special ed. So that's why we're very cautious, I think, with that line.
So we also have a number of retirements that have been notified. Is anybody proposing an attrition reduction? Because usually that's sizable too. So if we're not doing an attrition, then the reality is there's some buffer in this.
I was not intending to do an attrition reduction this year, given the budget was so properly prepared and presented. And I thought it was a fair budget.
Right, so I would be of the opinion, I still think that there is some room for movement within the budget. So I think that even with a $200,000 reduction, that I would be very comfortable with this budget.
Any other conversation?
Were you able to find that amount?
Yeah, as of June 30th, it was 157.2. So you've also got 5 months of interest that I haven't accounted for yet. But that's as of June.
157K.
All right, further discussion?
I mean, I see both sides of this. I understand. I see the data that you presented, Mr. Cutter. It's pretty black and white. I think what I look at is the historical return. And again, with the exception of the 1 year that Mr. Isbicki specifically called out, I feel like the return has offset the underspend historically going back 10 years.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, I would not make that motion under the spirit of that money will be returned to the taxpayer, which we had a lot of debate about and a lot of passion about last week, right? And my takeaway from that conversation was the school is going to do what the school needs to do. And that money cannot be guaranteed as returned to the taxpayer.
Well, that's the hard part. That 1 year clearly shows that. I can't guarantee a number.
Well, I mean, we also.
If that number comes in less than, if the fund balance number is less than $150,000 difference, I can't return 307.
I mean, I think in that instance, you're asking him to use a crystal ball when the district could have 2 special ed students move in, and all of a sudden, not only is that 200K gone, but then that reserve count as well. Like they can't
But
predict that
that's
piece
true
of it.
for every year being presented here.
True.
But we've always returned it.
But last year, $78,000 was moved out for another project. So I have a hard time with the we'll return it when the precedent has been set that it's not necessarily going to be returned.
It was returned last year, and
And there was $78,000 that was moved out for the LMS projects.
yes, and the underspend was 308,000, and we returned 337,000.
That's fine, but it was also moved out. So perhaps that number should have been 378,000. So my point is the number, it wasn't segregated. It wasn't kept separate as we've traditionally done. So the precedent's been established. If we were talking crystal ball, I mean, you're asking me to hold one too. So the reality is if we're going to treat this as every other budget, the numbers speak for themselves.
All right.
If I may, I want to be clear for a second because I don't think we've ever said we're going to treat this as every other budget. I think what we said is we do have a bottom line budget that the board's authorized to work with, right? And all we said is I mean, nobody in this room tonight was in a handshake deal with anybody else. And I've got people coming up to me saying, why are we doing backroom deals? Because that's what a handshake deal is. It's a backroom deal. It's a, hey, we've all got this agreement and this understanding, right? And we don't want to do that. We want to be clear and transparent and open about it. So we asked to memorialize those into an MOA, and we didn't for whatever reason. But we're not saying, nah, it's a money grab. Now we can utilize this for something else. That's not at all what anybody's saying.
And I'm not implying that it's egregious. All I'm saying is at this point and where we are in the process with the budget, I need to look at this like I do all the other budgets and make a decision based upon what's being presented.
I'm just saying we probably should have been doing that all along because it is part of the bottom line budget, right? And so, this is the one area where a relocation can make it go haywire on you. That's all. And so I appreciate it. I think actually having the reserve fund makes a lot of sense. But I also know that our special ed director works tirelessly to form relationships with families. We're not facing high legal costs in this line because we're working closely with our families, meeting needs as needed. And again, that's something that if we had a change in special ed director, things can go change very quickly. We're lucky, we're fortunate. Devin does a phenomenal job, but there's no guarantees on those things. So again, I just have to make sure the budget committee understands what keeps me awake at night, among other things, is worrying about some of these aspects.
I think one more thing that's important. I should have mentioned this earlier when I was looking at the numbers. At least looking at the spreadsheet that we have here, not Mr. Cutter's. The special services underspend over the course of those 8 years was a little over $2.1 million. The fund balance returned over the course of those 8 years was $3.8 million. So nearly twice as much of the underspend was returned back to the taxpayers over the course of that 8 years.
Another thing, looking at the numbers, if we cut 200,000 from it, it's going to drop it to just about $1 million, which if you look at the historical numbers, is pretty close to what we've been spending and doesn't leave a whole lot of room for, issues, which means we'd probably be dipping into that reserve fund, which really should be for emergencies, two students all of a sudden move in. So I wouldn't want to budget so close that there's a good chance we're dipping into it. I'd like a little bit of leeway in there.
So what's the number the committee's comfortable with, right? I think from my read on this, the committee is clear that there is a surplus there that's budgeted. So what's the number that's the committee? If it's not 200,000, what is it?
I'd feel a lot more comfortable with maybe 100,000 coming off versus 200,000 personally.
Please make a motion.
I'll make a motion to amend your motion to $100,000.
Second for discussion.
Motion by Mr. Barca, a second by Mr. Sun. Further discussion?
I would be comfortable with the same motion if we could get a guarantee that they're not going to dip into it and spend the money elsewhere. Because if we're setting money aside for a holy grail that can't be touched, then it shouldn't be touched. Use it for this or don't use it at all and return it. Okay, but don't dip into it if you need money somewhere else.
Well, I think we're going to get into that with the next part of the agenda.
But in all honesty, $100,000 cut, if there is an emergency, there's 150K sitting there that could be leveraged for an emergency.
Yep. Mr. Hayes, anything to add here?
No, I'm in support of the $200,000 cut. I think that evidence defeats doubt. We have the research that's done. It's right in front of us. We can't be afraid to make those important cuts. That's what the Budget Committee is charged in doing.
Thank you.
I get how nervous some people can be made, but again, we have how many 9 retirements. Most of these people who are retiring are going to be at the top end. Even if you hire someone in, not at the bottom, but in the middle, there will be a savings and attrition there that we're not taking. So there will be an underspend in the general fund that will be available to help offset. So in my opinion, 200 is fine. I could compromise to 100, but I think I think it's still, I don't think that's doing the best interest for the taxpayers. I still think that the 200 gives the school more than enough to accomplish their purpose, to service the students, and it's fair to both the families and the taxpayers, especially given the economic.
Tuition cuts, too.
There are no attrition cuts. I mean, we have, that we're not going to be hiring in everybody at the same rate at which they retired. It's just, so there will be savings that we're not taking that will be available.
Ms. Stevens?
I think at this point, I'd support the compromise.
Let's call a vote. So
Amended motion.
we will vote on the amended motion of reduction of special education by $100,000. And we'll see where that lands and go from there. We'll start with Mr. Sun.
Yes.
Ms. Harrison?
No.
Mr. Leary?
No.
Okay, I am a no. Ms. Douglas?
No.
Ms.
Yes.
Stevens? Yes. Mr.
Yes.
Barca? Yes. Mr. Hayes?
No.
No. All right, so that fails 3-5. We're back to the original motion of a $200,000 reduction. Is there any further discussion before we call the vote on that? Hearing none. Mr.
Well-
Sun?
Hold on. What is the percentage of if we're looking at this as a whole budget, 200,000, we're talking, what is the percentage over the overall budget? 1%?
1%.
1% of the budget. And I think that we usually take a much larger reduction. This is,
Well, but 1% of this year's budget.
which also has ESSER funds and other availabilities in it. I believe that 200 is still on the low end of what we should be taking. So to me, 200 overall is a compromise, but I honestly don't think that I honestly believe that even with this reduction, the school will be in very good shape. I would not support it if I thought that the school was going to be hamstrung or hurt.
We'll call the vote. Mr. Sun?
No.
Ms. Harrison?
No.
Mr. Leary?
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Douglas?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
No.
Mr. Barca?
No.
And Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Motion fails 4-4 by vote. Okay.
Would there be an ability to recall the vote when we have a full board?
Our bottom line vote will be on January 6th.
Okay.
And at that time, before we bottom line vote, assuming we have a full board at that time, that's when we can make final adjustments.
I mean, in fairness, we have a precedence of we recalled some votes last year.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. So that budget's going to stand as is. And the other update to the school budget, just for awareness, I know this is small, but I'll make it bigger. This is kind of my tracker of where we're keeping all the numbers here that we voted on. With the vocational change that was sent to the committee on CHS.
Could you zoom in a little bit, please? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it still small? Yeah.
There we go. Thank you.
Yep. Perfect. So this first line is CHS. That bottom line budget was reduced from 567,226, which was our end number after our reduction last week, was further reduced by the school to 566,236. So we will need to revote on the bottom line of CHS this evening, unless there are any other changes or motions that the committee has for CHS budget.
So those are overall reductions?
So our overall reductions as of last week were $14,257 from a budget committee's perspective. And where we're landing right now is a total of $23,342,624. And then we have to add in the special reserve, right, Corey? Or is that,
I think that just gets added to the,
You got food service in there?
Is that 247?
Yeah, this
You
is
got
the number
all
that we
departments, and
reconciled.
You got to add the 575 for the
Right.
special revenue.
yeah.
But that current bottom line doesn't include the reduction the school board made for the $1,000.
Correct. So we've got to vote on
Right.
when we get to January 6th, we'll vote on the bottom line number. My goal here is just to give you an idea of where it is. Yep. Yep. All right. So is there a motion to have a bottom line vote on CHS of 566, 236?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Sun. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Barca. Further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Mr. Sun,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison, Mr. Leary.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Douglas.
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Stevens, Mr. Barca,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
All right, that passes 8-0. Fantastic. Anything else to present this evening?
Do you want to go over the extremely drafty warrant article?
We have a few minutes. Certainly, if you'd like to present the draft as
Yeah.
is, that's great. I know there are no numbers though, right?
Exactly. But have you shared that out with
I
everybody?
have shared
Perfect.
that out, yes.
So basically, we've taken this to the board in our last public session. It's going to go back next week. We're going to have tighter numbers, but I'm going to verbally just kind of walk through it. So Article 1 will be the budget that gets determined after the public hearing, right? So that will be where we'll fill the numbers in and have what it is that we're bringing forward for Article 1. Article 2 is being reserved for our collective bargaining agreement. I can tell you that the parties reached a tentative agreement last Wednesday, and that has gone forward to the association for ratification, and then it'll be coming forward to the board. So we're optimistic that we will have an agreement and numbers that we can fill in there. Article 3 is being held as the warrant article that if the collective bargaining agreement were to fail, then the voters could authorize us to hold a special meeting. We historically have not put this on the warrant, and the board has not decided whether they want to include this on the warrant. However, because of the change in law, there's really no other mechanism if the bargaining agreement were to fail. You no longer can go and petition the court to have a special meeting. So really, it has to be authorized by the voters. So that's kind of a game changer, and I think the board has to weigh what is it that we want to do should that bargaining agreement fail. So
I thank you for putting it on that. We traditionally see that on the town side, so I really appreciate seeing it on the school side finally. That was not a fun experience. I'd rather not go through that again, so I appreciate seeing it here.
thank you. And the board will have to weigh in on whether they wish to hold that, but right now we have it on there as a placeholder. Article 4 has been finalized, so this is the support staff collective bargaining agreement. And you can see the dollar amounts that are associated so that we can properly sanbornize the agreement that has been made with the support staff. And that's been ratified by both groups. So that's why we're able to put numbers on there so that you can see what we're doing.
How many people are covered by that agreement?
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but we are talking basically 4 main groups. So it's going to be our administrative assistants, it will be our paraprofessionals, our food service workers, and our custodians. Those are areas that we have struggled in hiring, mainly because of salaries. As we pointed out last time, if we're paying food service workers $10 an hour and Dunkin's is paying $15, it makes it a challenge for somebody to decide to come to work here. So we've been doing some work to try to address that, and this agreement is part of that also. I think currently we have 5 open paraprofessional positions at the middle school. That's vacant positions. Then when you add in who's out sick, the COVID's not helping us, the whole 9 yards, people are just running ragged right now to get these positions covered. I mean, it's the reality of it. The students are coming, and we need the adults in order to properly educate them. So we're hoping this agreement will be helpful to attract and retain the staff that we have. Article 5 is the placeholder for the same thing. If it fails, can we have a special meeting? We'd like to think it's going to pass, but the board will have to decide whether to put that in as a placeholder. I want to talk about Article 6 a little more in depth because there's a lot of question marks in here. So it's potentially a 15-year municipal lease agreement. There's a final dollar amount as to what it would cost. This is to complete the renovation of the middle school. So what are we talking about in that project? Well, it's going to be the solar field on the roof in order to produce the electricity to then drive the updated HVAC system. It'll be basically a mini split system where each room will have proper ventilation coming in, heat coming from the mini splits that are provided. We're also putting new lighting into the rooms, new control systems, because the control systems there are just broken. Nothing works. It's all Dave Ross's hands. He runs down and throws a switch, pulls a knob. That's the control system. And that's really not any way to run a school in this decade. And our feeling is by going with the renewable energy options, it will result in some long-term savings. It's also a way for us to finance the project, because instead of bonding a large project, what we intend to do is result in energy savings and then use those operational savings toward the municipal lease payback. So it won't result in an initial reduction, but it will result in long-term reductions for everyone.
I think everyone's very interested in seeing what the number is for this one.
I will tell you that we're looking at north of $3 million for the overall project, and we are looking at savings of probably 150. And so then it's just a numbers game of how much is the municipal lease. Money is dirt cheap right now. So if you're going to do a project like this, now is the time to do it. And then how long of a time period will it take to pay that back so that we can then try to neutralize it? That's roughly the types of numbers that we're looking at. Yep.
I'm just gonna say the lease makes me nervous. For something like this, I think bonding tends to be, I understand that there's a slight probably increase in the interest rate. It makes me nervous because it sets a precedent for a big project of this size to bypass the bond vote, and that makes me uncomfortable.
There's quite a history, as I understand it, on the town side of using municipal leases. So I know that
For
this is
15 years though. I think so
The fire station.
The tower.
Right?
that was a bond, wasn't it?
No, that was a bond. Yeah, you're right.
But the communications towers, that's
I don't believe it
capital
was
lease.
15 years though. I think it was 7.
5.
5.
Years.
So my concern is a large number like this. I have a very big concern about leases. It just sets a precedent that I don't know that would set a good tone. So that's just my
Regardless
concern.
of how,
Right, but
my concern is, what's the contingency plan if this fails? Then what?
say that again.
What's the contingency plan if this fails?
Well, to do nothing and to keep having an inoperable ventilation system. I mean,
you
this,
make the case, just sell it.
our feeling is that this is the right way to do this. We're not asking. So if you contrast it against other projects that have been done with a shorter time period for payback time, you're not adding something new. This is updates and work done on the existing school. We need a ventilation system, making sure that it operates correctly, especially in the midst of the pandemic, makes perfect sense. And our feeling is, in meeting with the board, they want to bring this forward to the voters. They don't want to do this as here's something that we can do within our operating budget. We feel the voters ought to weigh in and say, yeah, we can understand this. There may be, depending on all the terms, there may be a dollar amount that has to be raised and appropriated because it's not covered by the operating budget. Maybe a supplemental that has to be added in there also. We don't know that yet. We're getting a report back from the general contractor on Monday, and that's where the numbers will fall into line. Once we know what the subs have priced this out at, we'll be able to put numbers together and bring it forward to the board. But, our sense is it's a responsible way to use existing operating costs, change how they're done, get the building buttoned up and updated so that we're not asking for something at the middle school. Campbell's in relatively good shape. And then we really need to focus on Article 7, which is our elementary school. And I'll get to that one in a minute.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do here is to take care of 2 schools without having a huge increase on the taxpayers. If you bond Article 6 and you're looking at a bond for Article 7, there's going to be a bigger bump than if you take energy cost savings to pay back the municipal lease. You sort of stabilize that aspect of the tax ask. Because there will be a tax ask on a new elementary school or on a renovation of the existing elementary school. That's a huge project. And so we're trying to look long-term and say, what do we think the taxpayers can support over the next 15 years? And this is why it's being structured in two different ways.
Are there ESSER funds that could potentially cover any of those upfront capital costs?
So that's the other aspect of it. There are ESSER funds, both ESSER 2 and 3 funds that we're earmarking toward the project. So once we get the grant amount, we deduct off ESSER funds. The select board's already authorized us to utilize
Impact.
Impact fees.
at LMS.
So that's going to come off. So, we're cobbling together all the funding sources that we can. And then ultimately that'll reduce the bottom line or the cost of the project, right? And then we take the operating cost savings and finance it going forward. So
I'm not opposed to it. In fact, I suggested bonding this project 5 years ago. So I'm not opposed to the idea. My concern is more of the structure. That's all.
Okay, well, I guess we'll get the numbers behind it ironed out over the next week, and we'll look forward to an updated presentation on this one next Thursday.
And then finally, Article 7 is the elementary school project. So we had a public information session on Tuesday night. We sent a mailing out to everybody in town, inviting folks to come. I know that JD and Kate were there, Tina, myself, Corey. And so thank you for participating in that. We have 5 options, and I have to be honest, we went into this sort of thinking there was a lot of people have leaned on the old solution, which is a new school at the middle school site. If you look at the RFP that we put out, it was sort of like, help us do this. And the more we dug into it, the more we realized that that really was not a good solution. We then dropped back and said, so what are the options? And we came up with 5 options. And we've then done a careful analysis of those 5 options, what the pros and cons are of those 5, and shared that the other night, and then listened to the public tell us, what are you getting out of this presentation? And I would say most of the groups and most of the feedback was, you really have to look for another place to build an elementary school in town. That the sites that we have are not suitable. And so it's really time to do what the town has done, which is move out of the valley and up on the hill, move for drier land away from the Merrimack River, pay attention to where the new center of town is. The old center of town, well, the old main part of town, I guess, was 3A, but the new main part of town is really more up toward Albuquerque. And so, looking at the capital or the master plan for the town and so forth, we now probably are going to tap the brakes a little bit on this, because we're going to get it right by making sure that we find the best path going forward. And squeezing in a school on a wet site doesn't make good long-term financial sense. So that's the struggle that we have at this point. So what is this ask going to be? We're not sure. It's probably going to involve some more architectural work in order to get there. We were asked a great question the other night, which is, why can't you just take the old plans and just move that somewhere else? And the answer is, we went back and we dug this out. The old plans were conceptual plans. So the architect listened to the public and did a bubble diagram. What do you need? And then they took the bubble diagram and they matched it up into, you need this many first grade classrooms. They put squares on a chart, right? And then they laid out those squares in a way that they thought made sense. An entrance here, a gym there, a cafeteria there. Here's your conceptual plan. That's all we have. We have a conceptual plan.
And it was for a 1,000 student school.
On how to have 1,000 students in the school. So I joked with the architect. I said, we'll just rip it in half. You're doing a 500 student school, right? So, but the point is that even then, it's a conceptual plan only. It was not engineered. It didn't include HVAC. I mean, that would be like me handing a sketch I made to a builder and saying, make me this. It's not even close. So the idea that we wasted money on that, really, I mean, that's what was done back then and what was necessary, but you can't take that and just go build it somewhere else now. So we are in the process with a really good architectural team of figuring out, what do we need now? Will it last us for 50 years? That's the goal. And then we'll have to design it so that it would be shovel ready and somebody could actually come and construct there. But what we have are not architectural plans, they're conceptual plans.
That's
So-
interesting. I guess without knowing kind of the town parcels of land, where's a big enough parcel to be able to put a middle school or an elementary school? Excuse me. I mean, how many available?
So I would
Yeah.
I would just say, let us keep working on that before I comment further.
Sure. Just a
And-
top of the mind question, right?
Nice new big field across the street.
Our goal is
I
to
think that's
sit,
privately owned.
The state forest.
Oh, the state forest.
State
Yeah,
forest.
yeah.
our goal is to sit down with the select board and to have a conversation. And, you know, I think we really have to try to figure that piece of it out. But
Yeah.
I think, it's not that I think, I now know building on the upper plateau at the middle school site is not going to work. And building down below will not work. So given that, and then, by the way, so here are the 5 options. Option one was to do nothing, which isn't going to work because the building is just not meeting our educational needs. Option 2 is to tear down portions of it, renovate portions of it, and build new portions on the existing site. It's not going to work because of a variety of reasons, including the wetness of that area. And the proximity to 3A is just not ideal. We then thought about building further back where the ball field is, in the back part of that lot. It's just as wet. It really doesn't solve the parking and the pickup issues that we have. I mean, we have buses on the playground in the afternoon while cars are coming through in the front. I mean, it's really not a safe scenario that is playing out there. So that's 3. Option 4 is up on the hill. And when you cite that off, I mean, they estimated that for us to put a road up to there, because McElwain is not appropriate for 2 schools to come and go. I mean, McElwain isn't appropriate
Hardly
for the
appropriate
middle
for one.
school, you know, and so it's very tight getting in and out of there. And so if you add a second school, you have to have a different egress. They said the road alone is going to be $3 million to start, $3 million just to get up the hill.
Not to
And
mention
the-
the
the
disruption of the wetlands.
Yeah.
The
Holes.
permitting, you're dealing with the state to construct that road. It's just the site work would be unbelievable.
So that scared us off because of the sheer costs of doing that. And, you know, and that's the other thing is the state won't allow us to build it unless we have a secondary egress.
Mhm.
So you're stuck with having a road up there. But I'm like, $3 million and all we have is pavement to drive on. And we haven't even done the school. Like we're blowing the budget before we even begin. So just understand that we are being very, very cautious. And I'm encouraging people to stay very open-minded on this because the concept of somewhere else came in very late on us, and now we have to figure that out. It's not what we were envisioning, but I guarantee you it'll be cheaper than a $3 million road. So hopefully we can get that figured out.
Build up on CHS. Back 2 levels. I don't know. Throwing ideas.
How many acres do you need?
So the state specs say a 10-acre minimum. They will waive that. So you can go in for a waiver on that. But I personally wouldn't go much smaller than 8 because, you know, it's the school, it's the parking lot, it's the playground. Do you want to play field? So 8 acres to do all of that. And then to make sure that you have, you know, we need to separate bus traffic from car traffic. So you really need almost 2 ways around to do pickups. So pickup students can be dismissed at the same time as parent pickup. One can go out the back door and one out the front door kind of thing. And you're not worried about the intermixing. So 8 acres even is tight to do it, but it could be done. Ideally, I'd love to see, you know, 15 to 20 acres so that you can provide buffers. You know, do you want the school classroom looking in your bathroom window? Probably not. So, you know, you want to have somewhat of a buffer area around the school building. So long answer, you can make 8 work if it's at the right 8. You really should have the 10, and 15 to 20 would be just a little bit more appropriate for outdoor learning spaces, sound buffers from neighborhoods, that sort of thing.
How big's the Campbell lot? Just out of curiosity, for size wise, like in comparison.
I should know that. I want to say Campbell's 30, but I'm not positive on that number. Does that,
It's somewhere around there.
yeah, I think that is the right number.
It's pretty rectangular, right?
It is. That's what I'm looking at a map. I'm trying to figure out how big that is compared to like.
All right. Anything else to add?
Because of 6 and 7, there is no 8, right? Let me be
Very
clear.
considerate. Thank you.
Let me be clear. You got the budget you got because of 6 and 7. Those are our priorities. There isn't an 8 because of 6 and 7. And, it's something we're just being very careful of going into it, but we'll get all the numbers nailed down.
Just to wrap and reflecting back on some of the capital improvement conversations that we had. So forgive me, it's a little vague or a little foggy, but I recall that the goal was to start to apply for state funding or state aid to
So
offset so we could go to the taxpayers and the voters in 2023 with a warrant article with a plan.
So the process for state funding, building aid, which is it's now become a competitive process. You're not guaranteed in it, but we need to have a letter of intent that we're going to have a application by January 1st. So I think we're meeting next week to get that letter drafted and everything, get it submitted for January 1st, and then your full application has to go in July 22.
So my question is, do we need a plan solidified in order for you to move forward with that part of the process?
We do not.
No, you provide designs and like a really good pricing set, I think, in July in the full application. But we have to go through and see what those pieces that.
And it doesn't even have to be the full pricing set. What you have to have done, yes, and you have to have provided the justifications as to why you should qualify for state aid. So basically, there's a substantial checklist on the existing Griffin that we would have to complete, and then that will be scored in this competitive process. So regardless of what you're building, the question is, what are you replacing? Okay. Much of Griffin's deficiencies, while they're bad, they are not as bad as other districts. So, we're replacing a building that we've maintained to a degree, and other districts may not have. So what happened in the last go round, so this is a new process. It's only been followed once. The worst school, I think it was Allenstown, got all the money because it was that bad. So 33 schools apply, 1 walked away with a competitive bid.
5 qualified, and then they funded the first 1.5. Like it's very competitive, and
that process has changed from what it used to be, where it used to kind of divide it up a lot more equally.
The way it used to be is you were guaranteed the 30%, and that's no longer the case. So the legislature has changed the school funding mechanism. And remember, first they zeroed it out and said there was nothing. Now they brought it back as this competitive process, but it's truly to get after the worst schools in the state. And if we're comparing against a community somewhere else in the state with a worse situation, they'll get all the money and we will get no money. That's just the way it operates.
There is another district, and we've spoken to our lead architect, Kyle Barker, and he's working with a couple other districts. I mean, we're not his sole client right now. But he's working on another project. He's like, if you go to bond, if you go to a vote and they go to vote the same year, they'll get state aid before you do, like because of the life safety issues in that particular building.
The other piece that they said is of the 30 schools that applied, you don't come off the list. So even though number 1 got addressed, there's now a new number 1, which was the old number 2. So you're not only, it's not like you start again every time. You just have to have a project that's so bad it catapults you up to the top of the list. So it's been quite an education process for us, because I know, people said to me the last time when the voters said no, there was guaranteed state aid, there was a buyer for the school. There were all these factors that we just, it's not the climate that we're in. It's changed that significantly in the last 15 years.
I think one thing that was very eye-opening during the session the other night was when we were looking at those 5 different options. I believe it was option 4 that was built up on LMS. Specifically, one of the items that were called out on that was, this is the specific plan that has been rejected 4 times by the voters. I think it's having been a part of this process through school facilities. I applaud the slow approach here. I think you could have some voters that look at this potential warrant article and say, yet another ask for this amount of dollars for this specific work that we've been doing for 2 or 3 years. But I think the school district is being thoughtful about this and looking at the priorities of not only the 2 contracts, the HVAC work, and really trying to find the best plan, because you could try to squeeze in something up by LMS or down by GMS, but is that really what's best long term? At this point, I don't think so.
And I think the reason we're so heavily trying to engage the full public is what do the residents of Litchfield envision for the next 50 years? I mean, when you hover above it and say the fire department's moved up the hill, the town hall is now here, this has been a slow vision. And then you look back and you say, what's it going to look like 50 more years from now? And I think you can see that there really has been a master plan sort of put in place for how to utilize land in the town. You see the way it's been zoned and so forth. The school should fit in and be part of that, not a side thought or a left where it was when things were very different. I mean, 1930 was a very different time to decide where to build a school. And so we're trying to decide where to build a school and have it thriving in 2070. 2070. Like we got to be careful about picking the right spot, thoughtfully laying it out, and being ready for, I don't even know what 2070 is going to look like, right? But we want to be that mindful of what we do and how we proceed. So.
Fantastic. All right. Any other questions from the committee? We'll look forward to the updates next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes school business for this evening. Next up on the agenda is handshake agreement process. So reflecting back on a meeting earlier this year, I don't remember when, we had talked about handshake agreements and agreed to table it and to talk about it at a later date. We didn't do that for a variety of reasons, but here we are. Once again, talking about handshake agreements. We have some time this evening, as anticipated, so we added it into the agenda. So to start the discussion, I mean, given the conversation had tonight on special education and the thought of handshake agreements, is this something that the committee would like to move forward with getting some documentation in place? What's the will of the committee?
I'll say, as someone who's been obviously on both sides of it, I liked it. I think it allowed you to budget a little bit more with that buffer in there, and gave the budget committee, the assurance that, that money wouldn't be spent unless, obviously, if there's an emergency, it's an emergency, you have to spend the money. But
right, for special services, right, and special education. But what about other areas of the budget?
That's true. I think for me, special services is a big one just because it has so much uncertainty. Like if 3 regular education students move in, it's not, you don't need all of a sudden another teacher. You don't need, more, so you need supplies, but it doesn't cost as much. Whereas 3 special ed students can just drastically change your budget so much. So I think that's the big one.
Okay.
And I think, like, thinking about the process itself, having not been a part of any previous handshake agreements, I'm of the opinion that I would rather have something in writing, because 3 years from now, none of us could be sitting here and this same conversation is being repeated. If it's the will of the school board and the budget committee to do to what Mr. O'Leary said, that whatever's left is returned, and we all agree on that, then there's some sort of MOU or MOA that states that, and everybody agrees to it, and it is what it is. It's clear, it's written, and it's agreed upon.
Okay.
My biggest thing is I don't think that the characterization of it being necessarily a handshake agreement or a backroom deal was at all accurate. It has been discussed every year during budget season, saying we understand that this budget is difficult to project, and as such, we're not going to hit it too hard, with the understanding that all the money will be returned. It's in the meeting minutes. It's been discussed every year. So to me, I balk at the idea of it having been a backroom deal. To me, that has negative connotations and is not at all an accurate representation of the discussions that we've had for the past 8 years that I've been here. I understand I can appreciate how people would like to see it in writing. I'm not necessarily opposed. What I do have a concern of is we've had people in the past, prior business administrators who have reallocated money. So any MOU would have to have an understanding that what gets charged against that account is strictly items that should be charged against that account. That general fund costs, we don't nibble down that account. And it's not to say that you would, but we don't know who's going to be here in 3 to 5 years. Just saying, that we have. You could still be here. You're right. You could be here. Should you retire? You hit the lottery. I don't know. But whoever your successor may be, whenever they succeed you, may not have the same approach. So, we've had in the past, I remember conversations saying where it was noted that what was approved at budget time wasn't necessarily the same number that showed up in the budget, because numbers actually got reallocated. So, if we want to have that discussion, then yes, there has to be what does get charged against that? What is appropriate use of that account? Those kind of things.
Yeah, is that really micromanaging this though?
But or we just say, you know what? We blew it up. Why go back?
Devin has the authority within her own budget to reallocate.
No, this was the school, the business administrator had moved money from the special ed fund to the general fund in the past. So if we approve it with the understanding that money gets returned and then say 25,000 gets reallocated elsewhere, well, now that money's been, it's been reduced. That's all. But
as a general rule, it's my 5th year here. I know, yes, we did a major transfer over to the capital project fund to do some of those monies that we've already collected and getting after major projects at the middle school. So I understand that, but as a general rule, I don't touch. That was the exception.
I'm just saying, if we're going to put things in writing, then let's put it all in writing.
And I think the example you gave is another, at least for me, a good reason to have something in writing. Like Corey Lee's in 5-10 years or whatever,
or 20 or 30,
20 or 30, and a new BA comes in. That BA is obligated by whatever piece of writing is in place and authorized by a school board and a budget committee, not whatever he or she would choose.
I'd like to hear Ms. Stevens' thoughts before I weigh in, and Mr. Hayes. Stevens?
Yeah, I'm always for writing things down, because what happens is a new person comes in and then all of a sudden half of the town is mad at them for making a decision that they didn't know was wrong. So I don't have a problem with writing it down. The reality of it is we took less reductions to the school board budget this year than we did the town budget this year. So if we can guarantee that extra buffer money that we are allowing to stay in the budget is returned, it sounds like a win-win-win to me.
Okay. Mr. Hayes?
Yeah, I'm all for, and I've always been for, whatever is not expended on its intended purposes in the budget gets returned to the taxpayer. So I'm all for a memorandum of understanding. Either that, or we hit the budget really hard and make sure we do the cuts and have the stomach to do so.
Yep. Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit different of a mindset, right? Where, I think related to special services that we should treat this account like we do every other account, right? And it's our responsibility as a budget committee to do so. Under the premise that over the last several years that X amount of dollars that weren't spent will be returned. And we've been presented tonight with the fact that in most cases that's happened. But again, that's not a guarantee going forward, whether you're sitting in your seat or whoever's sitting in your seat, right? And in your seat as well. It's true for everyone, right? And so from my standpoint on the committee, I'd like to budget this like we do everything else. And this is the whole reason why we have surplus or trust accounts or extra accounts to cover us, as a CYA type of thing. And if you need more money in those accounts to make sure that you do have adequate coverage, let's do that, right? If you need an extra $100,000 in special services, ask for it and let's do it, right? And that'll give the committee the freedom to treat this budget and this section of the budget like everything else. That's my thought.
I just want to leave a couple things in for consideration. We did have the 1 year where the amount of fund balance that went back
Yep.
doesn't cover what that underspend is. You're going to have situations like that. It's going to happen.
Yep.
Also, the school board, under the authority of municipal budget law, does have the authority to carry funds over from the
Absolutely.
general fund to the following
Regardless
year.
of what this committee
So-
agrees to.
If you put it in writing, there needs to be clear documentation of there are going to be exceptions to this rule. It can't be so stringent that, you know what I mean?
I agree, but
No, but-
I feel like that you won't get full committee buy-in unless it is I dotted, T crossed, very prescriptive, which I don't know how we can do under law anyways.
Well, that was my next suggestion, is that we consult legal on this, because, you know, the RSA does clearly state that the school board has the authority to
Absolutely.
expend the bottom line budget. So for that reason, I'm in favor of, we consider it a bottom line budget, and, you know, we are faithful to our commitment because we know that the taxpayer expect us to be, and trusts us to be stewards of their tax money. And we have shown, you know, that we are trustworthy and fiscally responsible with that money and getting after projects that need to be done. And that's the role of school board. So, you know, I'm in favor of maintaining the role of school board as prescribed by law.
Yeah, I guess my understanding was it wasn't a legally binding document. It was like an agreement between
It was a gentleman's
a
agreement.
gentleman's agreement. Yes,
And that's actually
just
how it was.
written down versus just talked about.
It was one of those, it's.
But again,
been
it doesn't mean
long-standing.
anything.
No, it doesn't. They could spend it on whatever they want. Absolutely could.
No,
Yes.
but it's the
But
whole,
it does,
you know,
it's-
we trust that you're going to
trust,
uphold it. And
yes.
then when you don't, well,
But-
there's
but-
the fields to that
But
trust.
why even put the school and the budget committee in that position?
Because we've never had a problem with it in the past.
Well, but I mean,
So-
now we do.
Well, now we do, but that's again, well, we can, there's no point in pointing fingers, but we've never had a problem in the past until recently. So that's why it operated the way it did, because we didn't have to change it.
So I guess there's two ways forward. I mean, one, we don't have Mr. Taylor here this evening, and I do think full committee participation on this topic is probably justified. Or, so we can table it until we have full committee representation, or we can take a vote on the will of the committee on, do we put together a document or do we not?
I would say we at least need to wait to see if the school board's even interested. They might just say no.
I think the full board needs to weigh in on
Yeah.
this too.
Yeah, I would table for legal opinion, full budget committee and school board opinion.
Fine. Then it's tabled.
Okay. have
We
that
started the
for next
conversation.
September.
I'm not sure what we got out of
Is
it,
that
but
at our next meeting?
Take up 5 minutes.
We found out I'm going somewhere.
all right. So it's agreed to be tabled until a later date. Fantastic. All right. Member input, new business. Anything from any of the committee members? From the school?
You got it.
No. Okay. Shifting gears into public input. Once again, nobody's coming in through the door.
Which is actually
Yes.
kind of strange. Usually you have at least a couple visitors during budget season, right?
Yeah. One or two anyways. Maybe they're all saving it for the budget hearing. I don't know. We'll close public input and we'll move into adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Douglas,
Second.
second by Mr. Sun. Roll call vote, Mr. Sun,
Yes.
Saracen,
Yes.
Mr. Leary.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Douglas.
Yes.
Ms. Stevens.
Yes.
Mr. Barca
Yes.
and Mr. Hayes.
Yes.
We are adjourned 8:00. Next meeting is December 16th, next Thursday, same time, same place.
Nope. Location.
Oh, yeah, school.
No.
Oh, we're here. We're here.
Yeah, December 16th is here.
January.
January 6th will be in.
Stop skipping ahead.
Sorry. No, I was reading the
I was doing it too, JD.
I was reading the
Actually,
the subject
January
line of the emails
13th.
today said 12/16.
December
And it
16th.
was going back and forth about LCTV.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
That's what.